Senator Harbison, will you open us up with prayer?
Yeah, right. If you bow your head with me for a moment of prayer. Thank you, Father God. We thank you for allowing us to arrive safely here to our work sites and allow us the same going home. As a matter of fact, Father, give us good minds to pass good legislation during this session and at this particular time. And these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. For the audience out there, I'm going to hold one of the bills that's on your schedule today. Senate Bill 97, we are not going to hear today. I've talked with the sponsor, and I want to wait until next week to go through that one. So it's going to be a pretty short meeting. Senator Anavitarte, you want to tell us about the substitute you have for Senate Bill 93? What number are you?
Number 9. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go ahead and I guess I'll present the substance of 93, and then I'll get into the sub. It's pretty minor changes. So this bill should be one of the easiest votes this session. This legislation codifies the executive order approved by Governor Kemp to prevent foreign adversaries from placing malware on state-owned devices and computers, and more than 30 states now have similar restrictions in place. This legislation is looking forward to not only ban current apps like TikTok and WeChat, but to compile and maintain a list of future social media applications that present a security risk to the state of Georgia. In the introduction of the bill, it targets concerns, again, with foreign adversaries and electronic devices, prohibits state employees or students from installing, using, visiting, or state equipment, a social media platform controlled by foreign governments, requires the director of GEMA and Homeland Security to produce a list of foreign adversaries. Any platform that meets the following conditions will be banned on government devices: a scrutinized company that owns or operates the social media platform, and then a foreign adversary that has substantial control over the scrutinized company that owns social media, holds, controls more than 10% of voting shares of a scrutinized company, could compel the scrutinized company to share data acquired through the platform, and has substantial control over the content moderation of the platform. Section 1 specifies the state have interest in security and the welfare of the government and the public. The state has a duty to take action to preserve the safety for the people and businesses. Company-owning platforms have potential to track users, detailed public and non-public data, and we've seen that discussion, I know, happen in Congress and across the country, from the FBI director to Senator Rubio and also to Senator Bennett in Colorado, who has expressed concerns just in the broader surveillance application that we've seen with DanceBite and TikTok. Certain platforms are owned by foreign adversaries, like the CCP, and these platforms serve as a risk due to the adversary's access to user data. And the CCP and other adversaries require companies to share data in the federal executive branches that have already taken action to ban platforms, as I mentioned before. Finally, Section 2 lays out conditions for prohibited social media platform to refer to the above section. It does add a rule that an exception to the rule that we included in the bill based on feedback from members of the Senate, the Attorney General, the Governor's Office, and others. It allows law enforcement, cybersecurity, research, judicial proceedings, and legislative proceedings access to the prohibited platforms. Makes a new code apply to executive, legislative, judicial. It also mentions K-12, and this would be state-owned devices. So we were really narrow with our language there, not to get into the mix of what is a state-owned device, or distinguishing what might be a issued device by the school because of how money and everything is between the state and K-12 system. Sets GEMA to make a recurring list of the foreign adversaries and lists on the agency's website. And finally, the director of GEMA should keep that list updated on a regular basis. The difference between the original bill and the sub is that we're clarifying and cleaning up the definition of company to ensure we'll be able to capture the companies we're wanting to capture, plus any others we may want to add in the future. We changed GEMA's role from preparing a list of quote-unquote foreign adversaries to a list of social media platforms to ensure clarity as to which social media sites are prohibited. And then finally, cleanup related to having foreign adversaries based on federal regs, and the fact that GEMA will publish a list of prohibited social media platforms on their website, exempting GEMA's role from the APA. The other last note I just want to make, just so it's also clear, is that lines 45 in the bill, as we define foreign adversaries, tied to the federal statute in which the federal government operates. So this isn't new language created by the state of Georgia or the Georgia General Assembly. We're basically citing those adversaries that the federal government, the White House, and Congress basically recognize in the United States. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield for questions.
Any questions? Well, you, one, two?
Two, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the sponsored bill. I agree with your characterization broadly that the policy purpose of this bill is a layup. I think it makes a lot of sense to ensure that entities defined under that federal provision don't have the ability to gain access to sensitive information on state property. That to me makes perfect sense. My concerns with the bill, which I previewed very briefly before committee, are with the scope, because I think what I would like to know a little bit more about, and at the expense of the chairman's characterization of a very short meeting, if we could just clarify what exactly is the activity by a foreign adversary that we want to avoid, and with respect to what data. And the reason I ask is because if you look at lines 71 through 75, these are conditions number 2 and 3 of the circumstances in which the social media platform is banned. And my reading of the bill is that if any of these conditions are met, 1, 2, or 3, then the ban applies. And so I think it is important, to lock down what we mean. My concern on number 2, to start there, is a foreign adversary has substantial control or influence directly or indirectly. Well, we know, platforms like Twitter, for example, my understanding is that there's some Saudi entities that have a stake in that bill, and I haven't checked the federal stake in that platform. I haven't checked the federal provision yet to see if the relevant entities are listed. But I guess my concern is with the breadth of substantial influence or indirectly. You could almost argue that if you had a direct stake in a platform, that would be direct, let alone indirectly. I think the argument would be that these platforms constantly adapt to the will of governments across the world, and so there's a decent chance that almost all governments are at least indirectly controlling the way that these platforms are managed. And so that, and then number 3, software or algorithm that is indirectly monitored by a foreign adversary. Well, I think it's safe to assume foreign adversaries are monitoring all of these platforms diligently, and you could make the argument that just even loading the platforms without some sort of inside access to the code could be monitoring a software or algorithm. So I guess, to your next question, which is going to be how do we, make sure that that's tailored. And I understand it's been attorneyed to death. So with all respect to the sponsor of the work he's already done, I think it would be helpful, and that's why I asked the question about what data is it that we're trying, because if it's like proprietary data or inside code that's not available to the general public, that might be a good thing to specify, right? To say, indirectly controls or influence that programming in some manner. And I'm not a technical guy in this, like an IT guy, so I can't maybe use the language off the top of my head that would be appropriate. But for both 2 and 3 to maybe specify what we're talking about is proprietary data not accessible to the general public that the foreign adversary is able to manage, control, influence, whatever. And if you were able to get it to a point that was a little more tailored, because my concern is, a state employee or a student, right, opens up Twitter on a platform, and it just happens to be the opinion of GMA that Twitter's influenced, right? And maybe they wouldn't take that broad a view, but I think it makes sense for us now at this stage to go ahead and tighten it. And that, believe it or not, I think is a question. We'll see if it has an answer.
No, I appreciate that, Senator. So just, I guess, in general response, I think the concern is that with companies like DanceBite, who, the CCP practically owns, I think they have access to basically every, element of data you can think about. It's not just kind of what's showing up on the screen or content related. I think it's kind of, what's really driving the algorithms, capturing, what you're doing in your day-to-day life. So I think from a direct perspective there, and indirectly, I think the other part too is that while GMA is going to be, creating this list, they're also going to be, consulting with, and I don't think it's been updated in a number of years, the foreign adversary list, which is, I think it's only about 7 countries that may be on it. So if it's one of those 7 countries, And we know that there's ownership, like DanceBite with TikTok. They would obviously qualify for that list. If you have recommended, language or anything like that, we can maybe talk about that.
If I could, GMA's not coming up with this list. Look on line 45, 46.
Yeah.
The federal government's coming up with it. GMA's the one who manages it at the state level.
Respectfully disagree, Mr. Chairman, because the way that this is constructed is that GMA maintains a list of social media platforms. The federal list is of foreign adversaries. There's an extra leap that GMA has to do in terms of analysis to see whether one of these three conditions are met. So my understanding of the way the bill is constructed is that GMA would make a discretionary decision interpreting the law itself to decide which of those platforms fall under one of those three conditions.
As long as they're from one of the adversarial countries that come.
Correct, and that's federal.
Yes.
But the final judgment of which platforms are included based on that federal list is a GMA decision under this bill.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I'll just so the committee has it, just as a refresher, that list includes People's Republic of China, the Republic of Cuba, the Islamic Republic of Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. Those are the six.
Okay, so not Saudis, I guess, and that is helpful to know because that would help with Twitter. Mr. Chairman, at some later time, I will probably suggest an amendment that chops off a couple of the indirectlies and maybe introduces some language like, over the proprietary, I would put that word in a couple times, content moderation practices or non-public, something like that, because I think that would get to exactly what the author is looking for, which is that, in effect, the platform is an arm of the foreign adversary, right? That it's proprietary, it's non-public, as opposed to just something that the general public can monitor that they're also monitoring.
Okay. Unless you got that language in front of you right now, your next opportunity is going to be when it's on the floor.
The amendment will come in this committee hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. You ready to present that now?
I would move to make an amendment, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Okay.
What is your amendment?
My amendment would be on line 72, insert the word proprietary, the words proprietary and non-public before content moderation practices. And then is the chairman or the will of the committee to separate my amendments piece by piece or make one big amendment, see if it lives or dies? Could do a combo.
I'm going to hold discretion on that one.
Okay.
If go ahead and do them all.
Okay.
And then I may give you a
Sure.
recommendation to separate them.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. The second amendment would be,
Excuse me.
yep,
0537S.
correct.
C46, okay.
Correct. So that would be the first amendment on line 72. The second amendment would be on line 75, after adversary, the very end of the sentence, in a proprietary and non-public way. So I'm going to try to stick with that language for both. And those would be the only two amendments I would offer to the committee.
Senator Anavitarte, you want to see it written out?
Yeah, I would see it right now, and then I don't know if legislative council want to give a interpretation of what we currently have against the tweaks.
Well, it sounds like my understanding is the way the law was written was to provide some maximum flexibility in terms of enforcement, and there's language in there about the construction being interpreted liberally. I think that's generally done just to provide the government with more broader discretion. In this case, I think you want to winnow it down, obviously. So that's.
Well, and what I would offer, agreeing with Ledge Council, I think it's important to have that flexibility in construction, which I think is why you make sure that the statutory language is narrowed to where you want it, because then, arguably, you would have close to the same discretion absent my language, and that's why I feel like it would be important to say, because this is the type of thing where if it's ambiguous, courts, everybody who's looking will look back at this conversation and say the intention of the committee was to make sure that there was a real ownership stake and not just sort of a tangential network effect whereby one of these people or entities on the list happen to influence, like butterfly effect, the content moderation policies, right? So that would be the aim.
Obviously, at some level, it's sort of a policy decision which way the committee wants to go.
Right.
necessarily illegal.
So just read it back.
Can you read it?
Sure, as understood, so on line 72, between the words "the" and "content," first part of the amendment would be to insert proprietary and non-public. The second part of the amendment would be on line 75, into the sentence after the word "adversary," to insert after "adversary" before the period proprietary and non-public. And then did you add?
To be clear, it's by a foreign adversary in a proprietary or non-public way.
Oh, pardon me.
Yeah, just to make the grammar make
In a
sense.
proprietary and non-public way, okay.
Yeah,
And those are the only two parts of the amendment.
correct. 2 amendments for now.
You good with it?
Yeah, and read number 2 back again. I'm sorry.
Sure will. I'm just going to start at the beginning of the line. Controlled or monitored by a foreign adversary, and the amendment is in a proprietary and non-public way.
Thanks.
You 12? 11?
So I'm confused about the language in the second part, because that implies, if you're putting it after adversary, that the adversary is controlling it or monitoring it in a proprietary, non-public way. Is that what you meant to say?
It is because my point earlier, and just so Senator's clear, I'm fully on board with the policy purpose of the bill. I think it's good legislation. But what I would want to make sure of is that just because one of those foreign adversaries is literally loading a social media page on its own and using only public information to monitor what's happening on that social media platform, I wouldn't want that to fall under the provisions of the ban or the umbrella. So I think the author's intention here is to say that the foreign adversary basically has some measure of control over the software or the algorithm itself. And if it were just if you took out the word monitored, I'd actually be okay without the extra language. But if you're going to leave the word monitored in, I would want it to have a limiter that basically says, yeah, they're monitoring it, but it's not publicly available information. It's the way they're monitoring it is by virtue of some sort of special access, right?
So you're saying you could accomplish the same thing, sorry, Mr. Chairman, by removing the word monitoring?
Yes,
in the
and thank you
second
for
part?
getting me there. That would be an alternative amendment.
I'm trying to get it through in my head right now. So the monitoring would be chairman, somebody from CCP has got a Facebook account and they're looking at their friends in Savannah. That would not violate what you're talking about.
So, right, if you just have a regular public access to the social media platform, and I'm not trying to do anything that's not the author's intention. My understanding of his intention is that we're basically trying to target scenarios where it's not just that somebody's loading the website. Because I think, again, with this broad construction language that we've got, right now it could be broadly construed to say that if you just use the relevant words, the software is indirectly monitored by a foreign adversary. That's broad enough, I think, to mean somebody's loading Facebook. But if you say, what we want is a scenario where the foreign adversary they've got basically a backdoor. They can open up the software and look at the internal data. And that type of monitoring, I agree, we would, if that's part of it, we wanted to trigger the ban. So that's why I was leaving monitored in and trying with non-public and proprietary first. But if the will of the committee is to take out monitor, I think it would functionally accomplish the same thing, because you would imagine they're not having that type of access to monitoring unless they control it, at least indirectly, right?
I think it's a slippery slope to say, if we take the word monitor out, meaning that literally, not to get into the private debate, but if you have TikTok on your phone right now, you're being monitored. And I think that's...
Because they have special access to the internal data of TikTok, not because they have TikTok accounts, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, they control the company, so they can...
precisely. So I think
Listening to us right now.
I'm okay with either of those alternatives. I think the senator had a great point about, there's one way to fix that, but if the will of the committee is to leave in monitoring, I would personally just like to see some cabining to make it a little more limited.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards leaving monitoring in the document. I know that we could probably call them and ask them if they're doing anything untoward to us.
They'd be honest about
Yeah,
their response.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Do you need to take a 5-minute break, phone a friend?
Yeah, I just want to double check, we're not going to create an
That's in a accidental change, and it may not. I'm not suggesting that from the senator, but I just want to make sure we get this right.
I'm not smart enough on the technology aspect of it
Right.
to understand precisely what these specific words mean. And I don't want us to write something out that has a very definable meaning
Right.
just because we're not as smart on it as we should be. So we're going to,
Yeah, we take like just 2 minutes. Let me check this, but I am hesitant to remove the word monitor.
we'll come back
from
in.
this.
We'll come back in at 27 after.
All right.
Vote is really a judgment.
So while we're taking a couple minutes here, while the senator calls and looks at the language, I do notice that we have some people here that I don't normally see in the audience, and it's always great to see our citizenry come up and take part in them. So would you three in the front? I don't know y'all. Would y'all stand up and tell me who you are and where you're from?
My name is Cliff Harris, and we're with Ray Lynn out of Carrollton, Georgia. We're a commercial builder, and this is my team that I've got with me today.
I've heard of them.
Be here.
Highly respected organization.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, now, who are y'all? What do you do there?
I am Monica Harmon. I am a sales and business development analyst at Rayland.
Okay.
And I'm Mary Lynn Klein, and I'm the marketing specialist.
Well, great. Thank y'all for being here. I appreciate y'all's time. I actually did know them.
What it is, it's not, the
Okay, we'll come back to order. Senator?
I think the way the language is right now, I think it covers, I think, what Senator McLaurin's trying to get at. I don't support removing the word monitor. I think we should move with what we have in front of us, and then Senator McLaurin and I can have further discussion. If he wants to introduce a floor amendment, we can take it up then.
Okay.
They'll give us more time to at least banter it.
Yep, my limbic system's not used to floor amendments yet, so I have to remember this is not the last
yeah.
opportunity, so thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm actually more comfortable with that, too, because, admittedly, this is not a field that any of us are extremely versed in. I'd rather, since we do have one more bite at the apple, we do a little deeper dive on what those 2-3 words mean.
I am addicted to Twitter, sir, but the Homeland
noticed.
Security implications,
Yeah.
I'm not as...
I'm cutting you off
thank
now.
you. Yep.
There you go. All right. What is the will of the committee?
You ready for motion?
Okay. I have a motion.
Yeah, bill do pass. LC 460537S.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nay? It's unanimous. Ayes have it, and we'll pass it through to rules. Thank you. All right, like I said, we're going to bring up SB 97 at the next meeting. We want to wait on that one for just a minute, and then we have 2 more bills. Senator, where's yours? Is it be ready for next meeting?
It should be right on the fourth.
Okay, and yours should be ready for next meeting? Okay. So by next Tuesday-ish, we should be ready to have both those bills in committee.
And I have a substitute after working with the guard.
Okay. Y'all two hang tight right afterwards, but other than that, we're adjourned. Thank you.